Hi everybody and welcome to our Apprenticeship Service webinar today. In our session we're going to be having a look at the new ILR-led Add an Apprentice journey, and this webinar is for training providers, and especially those training providers that haven't looked at the new journey yet and haven't adopted that new feature. My name's Nick Duff from the Service Engagement team, and I'll be doing the hosting for today's session, and I'll do my usual reminder if I can, and just remind you all that the webinar is being recorded, and let you know that if we'll remind you actually that if you're registering and attending today, that you've given your consent and you're agreeing for the webinar to be recorded and uploaded onto our YouTube channel. And if you feel that you've changed your mind regarding that consent, can I ask that you please dial off. As for the recordings of the session, I'll tell you how you can access those a little bit later on. Hopefully, excuse me, hopefully you'll all notice that you've automatically been placed on mute. You'll stay on mute for throughout the webinar. So our plan today is that we're going to introduce you to the new, or the current way actually, that you can add apprentices into the apprenticeship service using your ILR information. We're going to do a live walkthrough of that journey. We're going to talk to you about the benefits of using that new feature. Hopefully we'll go through some of the common misunderstandings and just clarify a few points on that. We'll talk to you then about some of the upcoming enhancements, some of the new changes that are going to happen in this space as well, that improve the journey even more. And then we're going to have, well, as part of that discussion, what we're doing is we'll be looking at some of the responses that you completed when you registered, so the pre-registration questions. Thank you all for submitting those when you registered. They were really useful in helping the guys that are going to be doing the presenting today to put together their thoughts and their presentation. And then after we've done all that, we'll go through a Q&A session. So yeah, so if you've got questions, you can drop them into the Q&A facility. Once we're done with the Q&A session, I'll let you know how you can access a handout from today's session, and that handout will have some of the key links that we'll be referring to during the session. So in terms of the questions, if you've got questions for the presenters today, pop them into that questions tab. You'll find that on the control panel. So this should be on the right hand side of your screen, I think. So look for the heading called questions. If you click on that, you can put the questions in there. Obviously we'll try and cover as many of those questions as we can, and we certainly aim to cover all of the main points that you raised during our Q&A session, even if we don't get around to answering each individual question. All of the questions that come in, all of the comments that you put in there will be shared with the dev team and our user researchers as well, so that they can understand, you know, what your thinking is, what your insights are, and if necessary, after the webinar, we might issue a few clarification points by email if there are some unanswered topics that we don't cover because of time. Okay, our session today is going to last for around 60 minutes, I think. And can I remind you all that at the end of the session, as you leave the webinar, you get directed to a really short survey. If you could fill in those couple of quick questions, that'd be really helpful for us. We'd love to know what you thought about today's webinar. We really value your feedback, so please take a moment just to answer those quick questions. Okay, so I'm joined by Perdit Nahal and Samantha Thompson from the dev team that have been working on this new ILR-led Add an Apprentice journey, and they're going to be doing most of the talking today. And I've also got Sam Miller from the Apprenticeship Service and Kush Khan from the Submit Learner Data team, who will also pitch in when we get to the Q&A panel. So welcome to all of you guys, and I think we're ready to start. So Perdit, I'm going to come to you. I think you're first.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Perdit Nahal, Product Manager in the Apprenticeship Service. I'll be giving an update today along with Sam on the work my team has been doing to simplify the adding of new apprentices and related approvals process. Before we kick off, we'd just like to run a brief poll, please, on how many attending today have used the ILR option to add apprentices. So whether it's a one-off out of curiosity or you're hooked and you're never going back to use the manual option again, please cast your votes, and we'll get an idea as to how many attending today have actually used it or yet to give it a try. Okay, that's great. We've got responses coming in fast. Okay, that's interesting. We've got so far 80%, 79 to 80% saying they haven't tried it. Okay, that's an 80-20 split. Interesting. So hopefully the majority of you that haven't tried it will find this webinar very useful. And another very quick poll on how confident you feel about using the ILR option. So those that have used it, the 20% of you, it'll be really good to get an idea as to how simple you found it, how confident you become using it. If you tried it and you didn't go back to using it again, maybe not so confident. And hopefully, again, the aim of this session is to help improve that confidence. Okay, that's interesting. 10% very confident, 14 confident, neutral 33%. Okay, that's interesting. 26% unconfident, very unconfident 18. Right, well, we'll come back to that question at the end of the webinar and see if there's a change after we've gone through our slides and given the demonstrations. Amazing, thank you very much. So just moving on to the next slide. So what you see on this slide gives an overview of the existing new apprentices and the payments to providers. So the current service requires employers to enter apprentice details unless providers being given permission or received an apprentice request from the employer. The details entered in the Apprenticeship Service requires approval from both the employer and providers to access funding, and subsequently providers input their details into Individual Learner Record, which must be submitted to the Department for Education every month. It is essential that the data in both the Apprenticeship Service and the ILR match, otherwise discrepancies referred to as data locks may occur. There's some analysis that was conducted in the previous year, which revealed that there was over 243,384 records that had data mismatches, and that resulted in £40.7 million worth of withheld funding and impacting 91% of providers. So these records, they'll require resolution, including reapproval of apprentice requests by employers, and our support teams are also impacted, who received 3,612 related queries in that same period, 12-month period. And again, the providers and employers seeking assistance to help resolve those data locks and release funds for training delivered. Next slide, please. Okay, so to simplify the current process, based on the feedback that we've had from users as well, so the current service design for new starts, we've been implementing changes that streamline the creation of apprentice requests, and the new approach is provider-led. So utilizing the individual learner record data submitted to the DFP as a single source of truth, the approval process currently remaining unchanged. The adjustment will no longer require double data entry from providers, also aiming to reduce the administrative burden, help minimize data locks, simplify the approval process, and facilitate timely release of funds to providers. Ultimately, this will enable our users to focus more on training and upskilling apprentices while running their business. So the new solution, for those that have tried it or seen it, there's a new option at the top of the Add Apprentice Details page. It's been designed, tested, and developed in collaboration with providers, and it was officially launched on the 30th of June. It is now being successfully used by providers with the appropriate permissions, alongside employers submitting apprentice requests to add apprentices. And by leveraging the ILR as the data of the single source of truth, the solution has dramatically increased the success rate in approval requests and also reduced data locks. So we're marking a significant progress towards a more streamlined, integrated, and automated user journey. We'll now give you a walkthrough of the current live ILR Add Apprentice journey. And I'll just hand over back to Nick and Sam.
Okay, we're just transferring over to control of the presentation to Sam. So just give us a couple of seconds while we get Sam's screen up on Sam's screen up on the screen. I can see lots of questions coming in already, which is cool. Can you just remind everybody, if you've got questions as Sam goes through the demonstration, just stick them in the questions box, and we'll get to them nearer the end of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, we've got it. Thank you.
Brilliant. So thank you, Perdip, as well. So first, I'll just walk you through the current live journey using the ILR option. We'll look at how a training provider initiates adding an apprentice from the ILR and how the employer reviews and approves those details. Later on, I'll show you some enhancements that we've made following our most sort of recent round of testing with training providers. So we'll look at an enhanced version, but for now, we can just look at the current process. So as you can see, we're on the training provider homepage. You'll notice at the moment that there is a banner, an important banner. So it just says add an apprentice using ILR data. You can now add apprentices using data from ILR files that you've already submitted. Using this feature saves you time by only entering data once. It also reduces data locks, preventing payment delays. And then it also gives you a link if you want to find out more information. So that is available on the current homepage, just outlining this new feature. So if we imagine that we are looking to add an apprentice and we have submitted our ILR file, what we would then need to do is click on Add New Apprentices. And then we see the Add Apprentice Details page. So as Perdip showed earlier, you can see the new option, which is Select Apprentices from the ILR. It says add new apprentice details imported from the ILR file you've submitted to submit learner data. So this is the new option, but you can obviously still use the CSV file and the manual process as well. But for the purpose of this demo, we'll select apprentices from the ILR. Then we go on to the add apprentice details page. So you're asked if you would like to add to an existing cohort or if you want to create a new one. If you're adding to an existing cohort, those are cohorts that have already been set up by you or your employer. But for the purpose of this flow, we'll create a new one. And then when we choose that option, we're asked to then choose an employer. So it just says that you need to choose the employer that you want to add apprentice details for, and that you can manage your employers if you cannot see the employer that you need. We've had to blur out some details, but all of your employers will be listed there. You can search as well the name and the account name and the ID if you need to. And you've got the employer name, the account name, and the agreement ID listed on this page. If, for example, you didn't see the employer that you needed, you could click on this link and you can just double check the permissions. And if the employer wasn't listed in there as well, you can send them an invite to join the service. But for now, if we just say that this is the correct employer that we need, we then need to just confirm the employer. So it just is just a rundown of all of the details we should have checked previously. And if we're happy, we just continue. If the employer is non-levy, you still will be asked to select a reservation. So you can see, for example, for this employer, we've got 3 reservations that have already been set up. If one of these reservations, for example, wasn't appropriate to the learner that you're looking to add, we've also added this new option, which is reserve new funding. So we found before that if you had a last-minute reservation that you needed to add, you weren't able to do that before. So if these reservations aren't appropriate, you can add a reservation whilst going through the journey. But obviously, you'd still need to reserve in advance to make sure the funding is available. But for now, if we click on Reserve New Funding, then you have your Select Apprentices from the ILR. So on here, this is your list of learners or apprentices that are in the ILR that have been pulled into the Apprenticeship Service. So you should see everyone listed here. It gives you a rundown. If you can't find the apprentice that you're looking for, we suggest that you try refreshing the page, updating the ILR, or you can manually add your apprentice if that still doesn't work. You can search by name or ULN, and you can also filter your learners by start month and start year. The default filters would be for the current year that you're in, so 2025. But obviously you can amend that to 2026 if it was like Christmas time, for example. You've also got a timestamp here, so that tells you when the details were last updated. This one's slightly out of date, but it should be more in line with your current time. But it's a good way of understanding when the data was last pulled. And then you have all of your learners here. You've got the name, ULN, course, and the start date. And once you find the learner that you need, for example, we'll use Patrick, we just select, and then we go onto the check apprentice details page. So this has been slightly amended from the manual journey. Ordinarily, you'll be able to manually sort of enter the details for the learners or the apprentices, but you'll be able to see here that all of the details are sort of locked in and read-only. So this is all of the data being pulled from the ILR. So you've got the course, the ULN, name, date of birth, email address, and then training details like the start date, end date, and the price. So you just need to go through these details and make sure that it's all correct. If, for example, you did notice that there was a mistake in the ILR, we have got this help text here, which just says, I need to change some apprentice details. So it just says that you need to remove the apprentice from the cohort, or you can delete the cohort. Then you'll need to update the details in the ILR and then add the learner again. So we just want to make sure that all of the details are correct. It will take 15 minutes from your submission of the ILR to then be updated within the service. So that's the kind of time frame. You'll also notice as well that we've left the email address as editable. So if you do have a different email address in your ILR to the Apprenticeship Service, you can change that. It won't create a data lock, but you do need to make sure that the email address is unique to the apprentice, and it is the email that will also sort of send a request over to the apprentice to set up and check their details. So it does need to be the correct one for them. And then also you can still add a reference as well. So that's as part of what you can do in the manual process. So we've still included that, as we know some training providers do like that feature. And then once you're happy, you're asked about recognition of prior learning. So you will need to enter RPL details if that is applicable to the learner or the apprentice. In this scenario, we'll say yes, we do need to add RPL. And then you'll go onto the familiar RPL page where you just need to fill in all of the data. As everyone may or may not know, RPL isn't broken down in the ILR at this sort of current time. So that's why there is still the requirement for you to be entering these details within the service. But hopefully that might change in the future once things are a bit more aligned. And then once you've added in the RPL, you go onto the Approve Apprentice Details page. So there's been no updates to this, so it's the same as the manual page. You can see the employer name, the reference, all of the details that you've just pulled from the ILR. And then you've got the same options as before, so you can view, you can add another apprentice. If you click on Add Another Apprentice, you'll be asked to add either by the ILR, or you can add manual details depending on your preference. And you can also delete the cohort as well. So that's still sort of similar functionality. And then once you're happy, you've got the Approve These Details radio button. So if you're happy to approve and notify the employer, you can, or if you wanted for them to have a look at it and send it back, you can use the second option, which is current functionality. But we'll say that we're happy with these details and we want to send it to the employer. I've just included a message here to inform the employer of the approval date that I need them to approve by, and I've also included a contact telephone number or email, and also my name, just to make sure it's as clear as possible who the request has come from. And then once that's all good, I'll save and submit, and it does say that the cohort's been approved and sent to the employer. There's a rundown of the information that we've just added. And then it also says what happens next. The employer has 2 weeks to review and approve the cohort. If they don't do this within 2 weeks, the cohort will automatically go into your ready for review. This feature was added in order to sort of stop requests getting stuck. So we're very welcome to feedback on that, if it's working, if it's not working. And sort of after you receive this confirmation page, the employer will then receive a notification to let them know that they have an approval request come to them. Employers will get daily reminders if they have their email notifications switched on. So it's down to their preferences if they do receive those or not, which is something to be aware of. But what I'll do now is I'll go onto the employer side of the current process. So this is the employer homepage. It's got the employer name at the top. Also has their agreement ID listed here. So if you didn't know the agreement ID for an employer, they have got it on their homepage, and they've also got the task here as well. So it says 1 apprentice request ready for review. So you can either click this link or you can go into apprentices and then apprentice requests, but I'm just going to click here to save time. And then now we're on to the apprentice request page for the employer. So it kind of mirrors the training provider request page. So you've got these different sections. So apprentice request ready to review, with training provider, draft, and with transfer sending employers. So the request that we've just sent over is actually sat in the first sort of table. And it just has the name, the reference, and the message that we added. So the employer would just need to click on there, and then they also get the Approve Apprentice Details page. It just lists their organisation name, the reference, and the status. It's got the message that we added from the training provider, and then it's got the details that we've pulled from the ILR as well. The difference is that also when the employer clicks on View, the details are locked in also. So the employer is not able to edit the course or any of the details apart from the email address. So again, we've still left this email address as an editable field in case any emails do change with the apprentice. They also have the option to add a reference, just like training providers, so they can add that if they like. And it also lists the prior learning details that we added in as well. One thing to comment on is if there is something within the application or the details that the employer thinks are incorrect, there are 2 ways of them sort of handling it. We've put some help text here to say that you can only change the apprentice's email address. Your training provider will need to make any other changes. So they are not able to amend these details anymore. What they would need to do is, if we go back onto the approve page, they've got 2 options. So on the approve radio button, they have the option to request changes from training provider. So if they want to, they can click on there and they can add a message to say, oh, the date of birth is actually this, not this. Please, can you amend it? And then that request would then go back to the corresponding training provider with the notes in order to then update the ILR. And then the ILR would be updated, and then it would need to be resent back to the employer for approval. Another way of doing it is if there are sort of a long list of learners within the cohort, the employer could remove the learner and then approve the rest of the cohort, and then the learner that had any issues would then need to be resent and re-added with the correct details. So this is kind of as-is functionality, but it's good to just go through, I guess. But if we say that we're happy with these details, they're all correct, then all the employer needs to do is click on approve the details, save and submit, and then they have the confirmation page that just says that the details have been approved. It lets them know that they can view the learner within the Manage Apprentices section of their account. And then it just also confirms that the apprentice will receive the email alert inviting them to the My Apprenticeship Service, where they'll be able to review and confirm their details. So that's the full flow for the current process. I'll hand back over to you, Perdip.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Sam. Okay, Just wait for the slides to come back. Okay, so as seen in the walkthrough, the introduction of the new features while retaining existing functionality it helps maintain user familiarity and significantly accelerates the approvals process. On the employer side, you see that we're mirroring the training provider read-only as well. So employers will only be able to edit email address and add their own reference. Any changes that will need to come back to the provider to progress via the ILR. The apprentice request using the ILR data we've seen has resulted in twofold increase in the approvals rate process compared to the manual, and whilst also reducing the administrative burden on users. It's worth mentioning here that employers receive daily reminders, as Sam mentioned, because we had to have several requests with providers asking if they have the functionality to send reminders. They do get that already before the request expires before 2 weeks, and to return to the provider for review and decide on what action they want to take next. We are also looking at ways that we can simplify the employer approvals to mitigate delays as well. So some further research and testing is happening in that space, and we'll update in future sessions. Making apprentice details read-only for the ILR based requests that will help preserve the integrity of the ILR data, and this will be followed by the removal of the add apprentice option for both providers and employers. So the manual option, we are looking to remove that in the near future, and that will help reduce the risk of data locks. Please note that there is no change to the process for reserving funds for non-levy paying employers, and this should still be done in advance where possible. Okay, so I'm now just going to hand back to Nick or Sam for a walkthrough of our enhancements that we've been testing with providers.
Yeah, again, we're just waiting for the screen to flip over. I think, Sam, we've got the screen now.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Here we've got the updated and latest training provider journey that we've tested with users. So what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll just highlight any updates and features as we go through. So this is the training provider homepage. You'll see the name. If we imagine that we're looking to add 3 apprentices from the ILR, what we'll need to do is click on Add New Apprentices. And then we've got the how do you want to add apprentice details. You can select the learner from the ILR, upload the CSV file, or choose the manual flow. Again, we'll just, for the purpose of this demo, select the learner from the ILR. And then we've got this new page, which is a before you continue page. So on here, we're just trying to highlight the key information that you need to know, which was requested from training providers in our testing. So we've got our first section, which says check your permissions. So you must have employer permission to add apprentices. You can check or update permissions by using this link here. And if you don't have permission, you can ask the employer to create a cohort for you, and then you'll be able to add your learners or the learners from the ILR. So that will act as a permission for that one cohort. We also ask that you check your ILR file. So we want you to make sure that you're adding the employer agreement ID. So you'll be able to find that in the View Employers and Manage Permissions page, as well as your Choose Employer page. By adding the agreement ID, it's a way of us knowing what learner is with what employer, as currently in the ILR, there's not a way of us knowing that at the moment. We're also asking that you add a unique email address for each learner as well. So that's just to make sure that the correct emails are being used. Then we talk about funding. So we look at reservations. So again, if you've reserved funds or if you're only adding 1 apprentice, you'll get the option to choose an existing reservation. Or like I showed you in the previous journey, you can reserve in the journey if you really need to. If there are no reservations set up, or if you're adding multiple apprentices, funds will be automatically reserved for you. So that works quite similarly to the CSV bulk upload, if anyone is aware of that one. We talk about transfers as well. So if you're using transfer funding, you'll need to make sure that your employer sends over the cohort to you first, and then you'll be able to add the details from there. So that's currently how it works at the moment as well. And then we've got some steps to follow. So after submitting your ILR file, you need to allow 15 minutes for records to update in the service. And then you need to follow the steps, which is to choose whether you want to create a new or existing cohort, choose the employer, select the learners, and then you'll need to add any recognition of prior learning and standard options if relevant. And then lastly, we just give you the link to the Add an Apprentice or Change Their Status help page, which has more information and you can reference. So with that in mind, if we click on continue, and it just says, do you want to create a new cohort? So we can choose a new one, or we can add to an existing one. From feedback, we've added a bit of sort of hint text here to explain that you can add to a cohort that you or your employer have already set up using this option, but we'll create a new one. Then we go on to choose an employer page. So on here, similar to what I showed you before, but we've made an update with these tags. So by using these tags, you'll be able to tell if the employer that you're selecting is non-levy or levy. So that was widely requested in our testing sessions. And then again, we've got a reference to the agreement ID just here as well. So if we select Bambino's Day Nursery, we now have the updated select learners from ILR page. So this is slightly different to before, where you would need to add the learners one by one. Now you'll be able to add the learners in groups or in cohorts. So I'll just show you how that works in a second. We just want to make it clear what the list includes. So all of these learners, what does it mean? So we've got some help text here to say the list shows learners from your ILR submissions who are not yet approved in the service. It includes learners linked to Bambino's Day Nursery in your ILR or not linked to any employer. And then in brackets, because no agreement ID has been added in the ILR. So whilst we've added the agreement ID into the ILR, at the moment, we're still waiting for that to be widely added by training providers. So it's a bit of a work in progress. If we go down to the search section, so you can search your learner name or ULN here, which will show them within this table. You can also filter your learners as well if you're looking to add like a group of learners. We were testing learning type, so apprenticeships, boot camps and short courses. This isn't ready to go into the live process just yet, but we were just looking to get feedback. We've got the start month and start year as filters that we've already got in the current process, so you can change that to October and then apply filters, and then you can see all of your learners for October. You can also use the course as well. So the course name will be those courses that have been listed in the ILR to your learners, so we can apply that. So for example, we've got 5 learners who are doing business admin in October. If you create a filtered list here and you want to create a group using those learners, you can add all filtered learners at once. So by doing that, all of the learners that you've selected in your filters are applied to your learners in cohort, and then you'll be able to add them from there. I'll remove them for now, and then I'll just quickly show you the agreement ID. So again, we've got the filter here where if you just want to filter the learners who have Bambino's Day Nursery, you can see that we've got 68 learners that have the agreement ID for Bambino's Day Nursery. If we go to no employer, we've got 5 learners that don't have an agreement ID added, so might be a helpful way of knowing where the agreement ID has been added or not. I'll just get the filters back to how they were before. I know that I want to add 3 learners, so I'm just going to go through and then add them manually one by one. So I would like Alan, Bernard and Carla. So you can also select your learners one by one, as well as using this link to add them all at once. Depending on what type of employer you'll have sort of limits as to how many you can add. So for a levy employer, you'll be able to add up to 100. For a non-levy employer, it will be very dependent on how many reservations you have left for that employer. But for now, we'll just add these 3 learners to our list. And then we go on to the Check Apprentice Details page. So this is just an updated version of the Approve Apprentice Details page. We've got the status, the employer, the reference. You can check the details on this main page. You'll notice there's a slight difference to the table. So we've included RPL, or recognition of prior learning, here, and it's defaulted to no for all learners. That saves you going in and manually saying if a learner has RPL, yes or no. So trying to save a bit of time, but if your learners do have RPL, you do need to be adding it in here. You have your RPL page where you can add that in. I won't do that for these learners, but that's where you can do it. You can also go into view. So if you want to view the full details for your learner, you can go through and double check. And you'll see that you've got the name, email address, date of birth, ULN, the employer details, the training dates. So we've just clarified the start date and that the plan date doesn't include the endpoint assessment. That was based on feedback from training providers. We've also got the apprenticeship details, so the course name, the maximum funding for the course, the version, standard option if applicable, and also you can still add your reference as well if that's being used. And then we've got a breakdown for the price. So instead of just having the total agreed apprenticeship price, we've got the TMP1 and TMP2, so you can now see the breakdown. And then lastly, we've got the recognition of prior learning as well. So if you want to add RPL, you can do that here also. If, for example, you also want to add the email address, you can do that. You can save that in there. Same for the standard option. You want to make sure that you're adding in a standard option, you can include that. And then you've filled in the page. Once you're happy, you can save and submit. And then you would just need to double check and make sure that all of those details are correct for all of the learners in your list by clicking on view. And then if you want to add another apprentice, you can say you realise that you have someone else that you want to add that you've forgotten. You can click on add another apprentice and you'll go back onto your select learners from ILR page. I won't add anyone else for now. I'm going to say that I'm happy with my cohort, and I'll go to the radio button at the bottom and it says, do you want to send these details to the employer? Yes. If you want to send the employer the details to review, you can leave a message in here, or you also have the option to save as a draft and return to apprentice requests. So you could save this as a draft, come back to it later. If you needed to make any changes as well, it just lets you know that you can change some details here using the view link, and that includes RPL and standard options. Any other details that need to be updated has to be done in the ILR, and then you just need to return to this service. Changes can take up to 15 minutes to appear. But then once you're happy, we'll just send it over to the employer to approve, although we should have left a message, but then you get the confirmation screen that says the cohort's been approved and sent to the employer, and it's just the same page as before, no changes, the rundown of the details, and that there is the 2 weeks to review and approve. So that's the end of this demo. I'll pass back over to Perdit. Thanks very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Sam. Okay, so as seen in the brilliant demo and designs from Sam, we're continuously iterating and improving the usability of the new Select Learner from the ILR page, and we're acting continuously on the feedback from user testing. We have increased the number of records on each page to 50, added the start date column filter, as you've just seen. We'll also be adding another filter for the course in the process of highlighting records that have been updated via the ILR. And the feature that you saw there to add multiple ILR learners at the same time we're working on, and we'll see that coming in a few weeks' time. There is also, you see there the checkboxes as well. So that was to link learners to the employers using the agreement ID. So I think there's seen a question around this as well about the conref number. So we've seen users adding the ILR agreement ID there, but we're still working on the functionality to sort of bring that data through into the service and link the learners so it creates that cohort. So watch out for all those features that we're still working on. It'll be coming to your accounts soon. We'll remove the manual add journey soon as well. We're still impacting that and having a look at the feedback from users. I think there's quite a few questions in regards to that or request, but the intention is to remove the add journey so we preserve the integrity of the ILR data. And once that decision has been made, it will be communicated through the weekly DFE article and a banner notification in the provider account. And we're also working with the ILR team to replace the existing tactical conref number field with a new field in the employer section, and also looking at the feasibility to include RPL in the ILR as well. Until then, the CSV bug file process will remain available. Okay, if we move on to our next slide, please. Okay, so we'll be just running through, based on some of the registration questions that we have had come through and requests have been going to our support teams. There's a number of misconceptions, and we're going to just go through these as like myths and facts. So our first myth that we've got is that I can only add learners to the ILR after they've started. Whilst this has been the usual practice, as data would be entered in the Apprenticeship Service first, providers can include learners in the ILR up to 12 months before the start date. Second myth is that I need to input data in the Apprenticeship Service first. So again, this will no longer be required. Providers will only need to input the data into the ILR record, which will then be imported into their Apprenticeship Service account. And that addresses and saves the double data of entry that we often get feedback as a pain point. Third myth is the ILR can only be submitted once a month. According to the ILR data team, the ILR file can be submitted as often as needed during the ILR open window, and the data will remain available in the Apprenticeship Service account at all times. So it's available there to review and submit approval requests to employers, even when there's the maintenance window. Another myth is that the learning dates in the Apprenticeship Service must include the endpoint assessment. So whilst both the apprenticeship and the practical period are required in the training plan, we have clarified with policy that only the practical period is required in the Apprenticeship Service and the ILR. So we are working on content in the Apprenticeship Service to align and update to reflect this. There's also a myth around funds must be reserved for non-levy learners first. So funds should continue to be reserved in advance when possible to ensure that these funds are available for the learner. Otherwise, as you've seen in the demo from Sam, it will be done automatically when a cohort has been created or where you're adding multiple cohorts, similar to the CSV book file upload process. There's a myth around the new ILR process will increase data locks. So one of the actual main goals for the ILR-led approvals is to reduce data locks. And since we've gone live, we've seen a significant reduction compared to the manually added requests. We'll also see further reduction of data locks when we start to use the ILR data for approved learners when it comes to change of sex. Okay. There's also a myth that some providers that they believe employer permission is always required to add apprentices. Whilst this is true, but if the employer has not or is not yet ready to give permissions, they can send an apprentice request for the provider to add apprentices. And we are seeing that 1/3 of the ILR approval request is actually done in this way. And our final myth is that I can't add learners to the ILR before the start date. So whilst this was true, as of September, the Submit Learner Data team have relaxed the validation rule to allow future start dates. However, if it's non-levy funded learners, they will only appear in the list on the select learner from the ILR when the dates fall within the Apprenticeship Service reservations window. So that's one previous month and the current month, 2 months into the future. Okay, so just to recap, and to help you get the most benefit from the updated and streamlined apprentice process, providers must either have permission from the employer to add apprentices or receive an add apprentice request. Apprentice details should be included in the ILR as soon as possible or early as possible to ensure submission during the guaranteed collection period. New apprentice learner records will appear in the provider's account within 15 to 20 minutes of the ILR submission. Providers should use the new option to add learners from the ILR. Apprentice requests can be created or updated at any time and sent to the employer for approval. And any changes that are required to apprentice details must be made in the ILR. That is now the single source of truth. Okay, so I'll now hand back to Nick.
Cool. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much, Sam, for those updates. We're going to go into our Q&A session. I think it's fair to point out we're running slightly behind schedule. So if in order to get through as many of these questions as we can, I mean, we will go through as many as we can, but I may, if you're okay with that, just steal an extra 5 minutes or so at the end of the webinar just to carry on so that we can get through as many of these as possible. Perdip, let's get the big questions out of the way first. There's quite a few questions about the manually add function and when that might be removed, or if it's going to be removed. Is there anything you can say on that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, since we've gone live on the 30th of June, we've been monitoring the uptake, and we have seen an increasing number of providers starting to use the ILR option. And we wanted to give time for providers to adapt. We have understood that there's some providers that it's more of an effort to change their business processes rather than moving away from the double data of entry, so they continue to use the manual entry. So this webinar is a part of that communications plan to emphasize on the benefits, get providers and the technical users start using the new option, and we will be having a look at the uptake again and any barriers that the providers are receiving in the coming weeks. So decisions yet to be made, but we are looking to remove it fairly soon in the coming months.
Okay, thank you. And then sort of linked to that as well, there's quite a few questions about the bulk upload facility, and saying, you know, that I think where providers have got lots of learners that are coming through their MI system, they were querying whether or not the ILR add an apprentice thing replaces the CSV file bulk upload, or whether that option is going to be removed. I don't think that's the case, but Perdip, I'll let you answer that one as well, if you would.
Absolutely, thanks. So during our early phases of design and testing, that was one thing that was fed back to us, especially with the RPL still remaining the service. So the CSV bulk file upload process will remain in the time being. And we are building, as you saw Sam demo, the add multiple. So we are building up that functionality to match the CSV bulk file upload, but that will remain until August 26, by which time we will know whether the RPL can go into the ILR, where it be 100% driven from the ILR. Otherwise, we may just need to retain that process or have a way to adapt it to fit in with the ILR-led process.
Yeah. Okay, so just to confirm, manual, the manually add option, the intention is that we'd like to remove that, but we're working to make sure that we've covered every base. We know what's going on with providers and whether there are any issues before we do that, and to make sure people have had the chance to use it and to see what happens, and so they're prepared. The CSV bulk upload, no plans at the moment. That carries on as normal. So if people use that facility, great, carry on doing that. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And once we got the select multiple, add multiple live as well, we encourage the CSV. We'll get some comms out, but yeah, I'd encourage the CSV bulk file upload users to try that as well.
Okay, cool, excellent. Thank you very much. So Perdip, there's lots of questions, I think, for for you and the rest of the panel. So let's kick off with one for you directly. The first question that came in actually was, how will the change of employer function work with this change? Currently it's going through the ILR already, and it won't let us use the function, as it's already in deadlock.
Absolutely, no, it's a great question. So this is the initial ILR driven apprentice, so it's just for the add a new apprentices. Now the change of employer falls into the what we call as the change of circumstances for approved learners. So where there's change of employers, we are actually working through the change of circumstances and changes to employer, provider, and any other apprenticeship details. So watch that space. We are impacting that and working with within the team and the other team's colleagues to have a look at how we can bring that into the ILR process.
Okay, then another one for you. What happens when providers try to add an apprentice using the ILR route, but the Apprenticeship Service doesn't pick up the ULN or the name details, and they don't pull through properly?
In that regards, if the data be added into the ILR and is successfully validated through the Submit Learner Data System, if you're not seeing those learners come through to the provider account, please do contact our support teams or use the Zendesk widget. There are occasions where they may not appear, so it could be that if it's a non-levy employer and they're outside of the reservation window dates, then they won't be seen, or if they're approved learners, they won't be seen for the new starts either. So any issues, please do contact our support desk.
Cool, thank you. Sam Miller this time. Question for you, if I can. There's been an issue that providers had with the ILR option, is that they can't add learners until the month after. Any comments on that?
Yeah, so I think there was this one and one later on as well, which is very similar, Nick, and it's something that Perdit mentioned on the bit of the myth busting. So yes, a lot of the funding rules have obviously stated previously where records need to be added and approved in the Apprenticeship Service before they're added to their ILR. This rule has been amended for the current academic year and will be for future academic years, and so has some of the functionality. I know there was a slight bug where people were unable to add sort of the financial information for apprenticeships. For sort of in future, there was a validation error on that, but that validation error has been changed. So now we've enabled it that providers can submit apprentices and the apprenticeship details of the information that they've got on their ILR in advance, and they can kickstart the approval journey through that route what Perdip and Samantha have just shown today.
Thanks, Sam. Perdip, a question about transfers. So how does transfer of funds work through the ILR update, through the ILR upload?
Yeah, so as it currently works today, so the option to select funding for transfers sits with the employer, and that funding type cannot be selected by the provider. So if the learners are going to be selected by funded by transfers, the employer would need to initiate that add apprentice process. So they would need to create the apprentice cohort request, send it over to the provider, and then the provider can add the learners from the ILR as agreed with the employer. So that, as it works today, it'll continue as is.
Thank you. Kush, there's a question about asking whether we've had any considerations being given to existing university processes and regulations, and asking how we expect the university to add apprentices through the new ILR if they've not been registered on a course or apprenticeship.
I'm not sure. What does it mean?
Okay,
that's probably outside the ILR specification type of question.
Okay, cool. If that's something,
there are a couple of areas. Sorry, there are a couple of areas I've identified from the question we have received so far. Some questions were around where do we record agreement ID in the ILR, and some other related question same topic. So there is a field in the ILR called contract reference number. Currently, you can use this field called agreement IDs, and some people have highlighted that this may not be appropriate place because contract number is at learning delivery level. We are planning to add agreement ID field from 26, 27 within employer entity. But currently, we don't want to make any more any ILR changes because we have finalized the schema for 25-26. So for the rest of 25-26, agreement IDs will be recorded within conref number field within the ILR in learning delivery entity. And from next year, we are working on adding a new agreement ID field at employer level. But we are planning for it. It hasn't been finalized yet.
Cool. Thank you very much, Kush. Sam Miller, question around. So he says, surely the issue for this system is from a compliance point of view, as the apprenticeship service needs to be in place prior to the start of an apprenticeship, and you can only report on the ILR historic data and not future data. You should so the individual should never have someone on the report on the ILR that apprenticeship service isn't in place for.
Yeah, so just similar to like the last point, obviously we're sort of changing that now, and it's obviously is a behaviour sort of change in that we're allowing people to have those apprenticeships added to their ILR sort of before their apprenticeship service. From a reporting point of view, obviously we will still have and be generating earnings reports, so we'll still be generating earnings which will look at future months rather than just the current month of what you should have earned, so it should hopefully give a bit better forecasting, and then obviously the payment reports that people receive will still obviously be sort of actual payments and payment reports of what has been delivered in that month. But again, just back onto the original point that people are allowed now to sort of add those future apprenticeships onto their ILR before the apprenticeship service.
Thank you. Perdip, so there's quite a few questions about the provider permissions. The one I'm looking at in particular is, so presumably this works if the employer has given the training provider permission to add an apprentice on their behalf, which is cool, yeah. Some employers, particularly people like the NHS, don't give those permissions. So what happens in that case?
Yeah, so in those scenarios where they don't give the permission, and I'm assuming that the employer would add those apprentices themselves. So once that manual option is taken away from the employers, because that again contributes towards the providers having to review the data, correct the data, and the risk of data locks. So the employers will, if they don't give the permission, they can send a apprentice cohort request to the provider, which then enables the provider to then add the learners to that cohort, send it back to the employer for review and approval, based on whatever's been agreed for that learners in that cohort and how they'll be funded.
Cool, thank you. And whilst I've got you again, I don't know, I can't remember whether you answered this in your presentation, but I'll ask it anyway. The add via the ILR option automatically populates to the practical end date as the end date, and they currently use the apprenticeship end date, this provider, saying, is there any way to change the date?
Yeah, so that's a common question that I've seen come up, and it's been the support desk have been receiving as well. So we have got clarification that in the Apprenticeship Service account, the practical date can be entered, so it doesn't need to include the endpoint settlement. We have spoken to policy colleagues. We'll make sure that it is more explicit and clear in the funding rules and the technical funding guidance as well. And we're also adjusting, making the content more aligned. So in the service, we've got training, learning and planned end date. In the ILR, it's the learning, the planned learning end date, start date. So we're going to make sure that they both reflect the same. When it'll be in the apprenticeship service, it will also be the learning planned start and end date.
Thank you. Kush, how does the apprentice get into the ILR in the first place? Asks one provider.
How do apprenticeships go into the ILR in the first place?
Yeah, how do the apprentice details get into the ILR in the first place? How does the provider submit their data?
Okay, so I assume most providers would be using an MIS system through which they can enter information regarding their apprentices and generate an ILR file at the end for the upload purposes, and some of them might be using a learner entry tool or ELD tool that we have offered. So the process is exactly the same. You generate an ILR file and upload to Submit Learner Data portal, and those, and then we have connectivity between Submit Learner Data portal and Apprenticeship Service. So those learners automatically appear in Apprenticeship Service portal. So it's exactly the same process that providers do on regular basis to claim funding.
Okay, thank you. Perdip, this is, I think, the thing about the notifications going to the employer. So what happens if the employer doesn't have the email preference ticked? How else are they notified that there's an apprentice to approve?
Yes, so they will see the notification or a task to review and approve the request when they next log into their account. It is a frequently raised pain point by providers, and we are looking at how we can simplify the approvals process or bring more notification options in. And my understanding is that providers would then often have to pick up the phone and they have to or they need to send emails to the employer prompting them to take those actions. So we are looking at ways that we can bring in different notification methods, and that's something that we're currently working through and coming up with take through user testing. So yeah, do watch that space.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the time. I think we need to wrap up the Q&A session. Perdip, is there a question that I haven't asked yet that you might have seen that you think we should address? Is there any key topic that hasn't been answered in some of the questions already? And I'm going to ask the same to the other guys as well.
Yeah, there's a fair few questions coming. I think we have answered the most pertinent ones. I will review them post-webinar as well because I'm conscious of time, and if there's anything that does need answering, then I'll get a response to you that could be shared with the attendees.
Cool, thank you. Sam Thompson, anything from your perspective that you've seen that we could possibly answer?
Definitely some things that I can answer directly back to people in the chat, or maybe send something out later on. But yeah, some really good feedback and some good comments, so thank you.
Thank you. Anything from you, Sam Miller?
Nothing to mention out of the time, but there's lots of mentions of data locks, so it's one I can work with Perdip and get some answers to afterwards as well.
Okay, and then finally, Kush, anything from your perspective that we've not addressed already?
So Sam has already mentioned that adding future dates to the ILR is not an issue. More precisely, we have relaxed the rule. So there was a rule preventing future starts in the ILR. That's been turned into a warning, and we are working to completely remove that rule. So going forward, only PMRs will be restricted from future dates, but your TNP1s and TNP2s and learning start dates can be future dates.
Okay, cool, thank you. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think there's clearly a couple of answer questions that things that we haven't got to. So I'll ask the guys to put a few clarification points out, and we'll email those out as we need to. Thank you everybody that submitted a question. I think the questions were numerous and great, and thank you guys for getting through as many as we could in the time that we had available. If I can you can indulge me, can I just launch one final poll question? So before we move on, can I just say, after hearing what we've said today and going through the presentations, how confident are you now that you could actually use the ILR option after this webinar? So we'll just leave that open for about 30 seconds or so and see what people are thinking. Okay, just go through, just give it another 10 seconds. Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's call it there. So close the poll. So yeah, okay, so lots of you are feeling confident, which is good. Quite a few, a quarter of the people are answering neutral to that. Less than, well, about 10%, well, 11% it is, that don't have the confidence. For those that aren't confident, what we'll do is that clearly there'll be the recording of this for you to go back and look at those demonstrations. If there is anything that you struggle with the process, questions that you've got, you can raise them through the help desk. But yeah, we'll make sure that you get the recording of the session so you can look at those as well. But thank you for letting us know what you thought about that. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide if I can. Thank you. So obviously the recordings for our webinars are always available. They're available on our YouTube channel at DFE Sector Comms. We've got 3 playlists on that channel. The Apprenticeship Service webinar recordings is where this one will end up. So the recording for this, and that will be there in about 2 or 3 weeks time. And then we've got other videos, other playlists that are available. So all of the support videos covering the different functions of the Apprenticeship Service are in the Apprenticeship Service playlist. And there's a couple of videos created to support the delivery of apprenticeships in general, and they're available in the Apprenticeship Support Videos playlist. So go onto that channel, subscribe, click on the bell icon, and you get alerts when new content is uploaded. And then finally, my final slide is some of the places to go that you can access support. So there's a PDF document that you can download from the control panel on your screen under the handouts tab. So all of the links will be on there. So other ways to stay up to date include the apprenticeships.gov.uk website, great place for information on there. There's always the Further Education and Training Providers community, which is the peer-led discussion forum for providers. We've got the GoToWebinar link on there, so you can register for any future webinars. And actually, in fact, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be opening registration for another webinar targeting training providers around the DFE's Enter Learner Data tool, which is a tool that's intended for training providers who need to return their ILR information, but that don't have a dedicated data management system already. So that Enter Learner Data tool is replacing the learner entry tool and is available free of charge. So we'll email everybody, all the providers will get an invite to that webinar, but those in particular that maybe don't have a data management tool already, that would be great for you. By the end of this week, we'll also have a recording of today's webinar available from the GoToWebinar link as well, and you can get colleagues to listen to that as well. So that'll be available on demand for the next fortnight whilst we're getting the recording put up onto YouTube. If you've got any specific queries about the Apprenticeship Service, you can call the self-service support tool. You can use the self-service support tool, or you can email the providers. You can email the support team as well. I'll get that right. That brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to all the presenters for all of your insights. And as you leave, please remember, if you can complete the short survey, we'd be really grateful. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.